On this episode of Insight, the diversity push. Is it broadening our horizons or is it stifling us?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives will chisel away at what made the West great, which is equality of opportunity.
Meritocracy, in my eyes, is a myth. Hard work does not exist in a bubble.
There are 650 ethnic groups on the planet. What are we trying to make here? Noah's Ark the fucking sequel?
We exercise positive discrimination. We don't represent trans or gender fluids.
No one should go to work and experience abuse. No one should go to work and experience tokenism, but they do, and that's the reality of work sometimes.
Corey, your dream growing up was to work in film and television. Did you get to live that dream?
It started off when I was 5 years old. My father brought home a silver case. And being a curious kid, I wanted to know what was in the case, and he opened it up for me, and there was a 16mm camera. And he put it gently on the carpet so I couldn't break it. And I remember looking into the viewfinder. I remember turning that lens and watching the image in the viewfinder come into focus. And so did the purpose of my life at that point.
So this was a father and son film company you ended up having?
Yeah, we worked as a father-son team. I couldn't have wished for anything better.
So how many years in the business have you had?
Oh, gosh, I think over 35.
And you did what kind of productions?
I've done documentary, I've done lifestyle programs, sports programs, drama series, movies, just about everything in every department.
What's the state of your production company today?
It's in a difficult place. We're kind of in a state of suspended animation.
And why is that?
What we are facing is a wall of a political agenda, which we call diversity, equity and inclusion, although some of us out there are calling it diversity, inclusion and equity, which might be the more appropriate DIE policy, because that's the effect it's kind of having.
When did you first notice that diversity policies were starting to affect your work?
It was a slow, gradual thing. Back in 2012, we were pitching a kids' adventure series called Billy Dangerfield, going around the world and learning about culture and history. And it wasn't the time for Billy at that point, but there was a request that kind of came up. And the request was, could we make Billy a girl? And for some reason, the question didn't sit comfortably with me, and I couldn't figure out why it didn't sit comfortably.
Have you figured that out?
Yeah, for thousands of years, we've been sitting around campfires telling stories. You know, that's the way we shared knowledge and wisdom with each other. And every culture has their own stories, and Aborigines have their own stories. And they have men's stories and they have women's stories. And I wondered to myself, what would be the appropriate response if you asked a Aboriginal man if he could redo his men's story with a woman?
Have any of your other projects been similarly affected?
Yes, greatly. We had one that was a romantic comedy about a single father, very much a modern story but a fairy tale. And we were in a very, very good place. We managed to raise $5 million in private investment without having to worry about the government funding bodies. We had a major distributor on board for, we were talking a worldwide distribution, so a wide release. All we needed was cast. And then we ended up working with an executive producer. He said, this is a great story. It's going to make more money than My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It's fantastic. It's great. Wanted to be paid up front and, you know, a bit reluctant, but we did it. And once he got the check, at that point, it came out, you can't direct this movie because you're not a woman. And you have to hire a woman to rewrite your script. And even though the story is based on a guy in Adelaide, we had to cast an Asian for the lead, an African-American for the love interest, and we had to remove all the jokes from the romantic comedy. Oh yeah, he said we had to make it more woke.
How did things progress from there, Corey? Is there any work at all?
No, not really. Once you get to that level where you're directing and you've got projects, and being in a town like Adelaide's a very small town, you're considered a competitor, so you can't even work on other people's productions as an assistant. It's kind of forward or nothing from here.
Does the fact that you're a father and son team come into it as well? That the team itself, when you're presenting these projects, doesn't have the right makeup?
Oh, absolutely. As a father, son, we're kind of stuck there. But it's also affected going out into the private industry. So at one stage, we were talking with a casting director, and we had a meeting with another producer that was with us. And we opened up the video call, and the first thing he said to us was, "Oh gosh, all white men. Well, there's no point working on this project. It's not going to happen."
Abir, you work in the media. How did you get your start?
In my third year of university at journalism, I saw an opportunity to apply for a paid internship where Media Diversity Australia ran a program to place you for 6 weeks in a major news organisation. So I thought I'll apply for it, and I did, had a few interviews and was placed, and ever since then I've been working in journalism.
You were accepted as an intern, you were at Channel 9. How did you sort of reconcile that?
Initially, I felt very embarrassed and ashamed of the way that I got in, because I didn't want anyone to feel like I hadn't earned my spot, and I was basically given a free ride. I have working class parents, so I just felt like everything in life has to be earned with blood, sweat and tears. And then when I got there, it just all washed away, and I didn't feel bad anymore, because people get their start through different ways, and those things exist for a reason, and I came to understand why.
Without your placement, did you see many opportunities presenting themselves?
I think the opportunities in journalism in particular are very limited. I have faith in myself, and I think I would have tried very hard and maybe moved regionally or done what I can, but in order to succeed how I did, it was a great opportunity for me.
Were you open with your colleagues about how you got your foot in the door?
Because I didn't feel like I represented what the scholarship or the internship was, I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't want anyone to have the opportunity to put me down or say that I got a free ride, when I know that that wasn't true, because I went to journalism school, I did everything like everyone else and was completely capable of doing the job, and eventually did get the job. So I didn't bring it up. And then one of my colleagues at the time found out what the scholarship was, and essentially had a go at me and told me that I'm stealing jobs from other people.
What kind of people were saying those things?
The people who were expressing disdain at my position and how I'd gotten there seemed to be the sort of people who had never faced a threat in their life, or what they perceived to be a threat. Because when I was coming up, I didn't perceive anyone as a threat, because I was just trying to succeed. And so the sort of people that I saw that felt threatened by me, to me, appeared to be the sort of people who had never faced it in their life.
There's a hesitation there. It's sort of that... Is it a feeling that these are kind of hard things to talk about publicly?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think this is my lived experience. I can see how it negatively affects my life, what my name is, what my family's name is, the way that I look, who I am. I can see how that affects me, but I've never allowed it to be the thing that I take as my identity. And so because it's kind of been forced upon me, I feel like an accidental advocate for something that I really believe in, but people seem to feel very angered and threatened by confidence in who you are and where you came from.
Fahim, you moved to Australia 15 years ago to complete a Masters in Accounting. After you graduated, what was the job search like?
I felt like a dream is shattered, because very motivated, having a one master's degree already from overseas, and then coming to do another master's degree in Prestige University of Australia, where you expect that once you finish, you'll be getting a lot of opportunities. And then one job is spent 3-4 hours, very motivated, no response. Second job, no response. Third job, hundreds of jobs. Like simply sometimes automatic emails that, thank you for your email. At this stage, we regret to inform you're not successful.
Why do you think that was?
Initially, we were clueless. But then, eventually there's a discussion amongst the friends, among the colleagues. Someone suggested, why don't you try just change the name? Samiju is my surname, so I went to Samuel.
What happened after you anglicised your name?
I started getting calls, some of the, phone calls, initial interviews, some of the face-to-face interviews.
How did you feel having to change your name? It's something you're given at birth.
It was literally loss of identity.
Do you think you would have benefited from an opportunity like the one Abir had?
It is very hard to answer this, because some of the friends, they went to, interviews and the expression of entry were completely different. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think we need to have more open discussion on these topics to make it work.
Monique, you tried to enter the modelling business in your late 20s. What was that experience like?
For myself, when I tried to enter the modelling industry, it was a challenge because I was considered too different to become a model. I was too multicultural, too short, too curvy, and too old. So I gave up my dream of becoming a model in my 20s.
Did you ever sort of feel pressure to be different or have a different way of looking at things, sort of like for him changing his name to Sam?
To be honest, because I am very confident in myself, I decided not to change myself whatsoever. So I'm from the Gold Coast, and Gold Coast is very known for being a plastic heaven. So I have consciously decided against Botox or any kind of modification that changes me physically and dramatically and permanently. And now you see it everywhere. There's multicultural everywhere. There's disabilities everywhere. Diversity is in now.
Not making it in the industry here, what did you do instead?
So I went to Singapore and I modelled full-time. And it's quite interesting that as a mixed Eurasian model, I was valued higher than the non-Eurasian models. Once I got that experience and saw what I could do, I came back to Australia and I started diversity models and broke the modelling industry in Australia.
Sheetal, you work for the Diversity Council of Australia. What does the council do?
Diversity Council Australia is the peak body for diversity and inclusion training for Australian workplaces. We offer education, knowledge programs. It's research-based training for Australian workplaces.
We've heard our guests talk about diversity quotas, diversity inclusion policies, for example. What are we talking about here?
Well, when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about the mix of people in a room. And from DCA's perspective, because we work in workplaces, it's in relation to workplaces. But broader sense, it's a mix of people from different backgrounds. So in the true sense of the word, diverse is different. So anything that deviates away from what we'll consider the norm is what's diverse.
So it's basically a sort of philosophy around making sure there's representation that's fair?
Diversity is looking at the difference. Inclusion is probably when we're starting to look at the equitable sense of how to level the playing field or how to redress some of the historical inequities.
Where has this movement come from?
We can go as far back as some of the social movements, like the civil rights movements in the 1950s, 1960s in the US, and then affirmative action, again in the US, and then, of course, adopted in Australia as well shortly thereafter.
What counts as diversity? Are we looking at gender, race, cultural background?
That's an interesting question because, again, what's different and what are we measuring difference against? So when we're looking at diversity and we're looking at diversity and inclusion, it's with the aim to provide equity. And we're looking at who has been prejudiced by particular systems and structures. And that involves looking at the power dynamics of a society.
Who decides which categories are diverse? Are there hard and fast rules?
Absolutely not. The person who gets to decide what diversity is the person who holds power. So society has decided for us who that dominant group is.
You also have a background in law. From a legal perspective, are workplaces required to have DEI policies?
No, there's not a requirement to have DEI policies, but there are penalties for prejudicing and discriminating against people with particular protected attributes. And those protected attributes can fall under particular diversity dimensions.
Given there's no legal requirement, why are they so widespread in the workplace, these policies?
Inclusive workplaces just perform better when it comes to productivity of the organization, when it comes to profitability and employee well-being. It's not just the right thing to do because it's trying to redress inequities and historic inequities, but it is also the profitable thing to do.
Andrew, you've taught HR management for more than 20 years. What are your views on diversity policies?
I am very much opposed to equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives in the workplace. In the long term, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives will chisel away at what made the West great, which is equality of opportunity, right? Not equity, but equality of opportunity, which of course I'm all for. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that the fact that I'm against DEI initiatives doesn't mean that I'm against diversity. There's a huge amount of evidence that diversity of thought, that viewpoint diversity, is good for workplaces, is good for productivity.
Does your view affect how you teach HR management?
It does. I am one of the few right-leaning academics in Australia, in the West, really. I am prone to teach human resource management from the point of view of libertarianism, from free markets. And so I go out of my way to ensure that a wide array of viewpoints on these issues are discussed in the classroom, as opposed to the sort of prevailing view, which is that it has to be all woke and DEI oriented.
In your view, are all diversity factors given the same consideration?
No. So the DEI initiatives tend to focus on gender, race, maybe a bit of disability in there as well. But there's an infinite number of sources of disadvantage. What about if you were raised in a single-parent household? What about if you were subjected to sexual abuse as a child, if you were subjected to bullying in school? All of these types of sources of disadvantage are almost completely absent in the DEI discussions. And the fact of the matter is, because there are an infinite number of sources of disadvantage, it's impracticable to ever achieve equity, because human beings are so complex and so diverse that we're simply unable to grasp who's facing disadvantage and who's facing privilege.
Sheetal, should the scope widen for what's considered diverse?
Absolutely, and I think the points you've raised are valid. Unless we are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives through an intersectional lens and acknowledging that a person is the sum of all of their parts, it's not going to be an effective diversity and inclusion initiative.
Karan, you lost your vision rapidly from your mid-20s. How did that change your work prospects?
I picked marketing and graphic design because I'm creative and I didn't want to do something knowing I'm going to be blind eventually, regretting the fact that I didn't really get to do what I wanted to do. My career has changed drastically. I have gone from being a marketing manager. I worked for not-for-profits, corporates, mining companies, and it reached a stage where I could no longer professionally maintain that role because I was making mistakes. Mistakes not because of incompetence, mistakes because I was not seeing certain things.
Did your workplace at the time accommodate you losing your sight?
For a long time, I didn't talk about my disability. It's clear that, a lot of companies back then did not want to hire someone who's blind. I would talk about the fact that I'm not using a cane or guide dog now, but I will reach that stage. And I could see there was reluctance. I could see there was this paranoia, like, oh my God, do we want to get into this?
Did you ever find that you were asking for things in workplaces to help you and you weren't able to get those things?
Well, luckily, we are blessed in Australia that we've got the NDIS, but there is a sense of shame. And it's not a sense of shame in the sense that I'm ashamed that I have a disability. It's more, what are people going to say? What are people going to be saying behind my back? Are they going to be judging my work and looking at it and going, this is great? Or is this great for someone who happens to be blind?
Sheetal, is there a right way to look at diversity?
An inclusive way of looking at diversity is probably the right way of doing it. And if you're a person who is queer, brown, and a woman, you're asking someone like me to then say, which parts of me am I prioritizing now? And how do I do that? Because I can't slice up parts of me to say, well, this is the woman part, and this is the gay part, and this is the brown part. It doesn't work that way. We have to look at diversity and inclusion of diversity through an intersectional lens, and only then will we be able to achieve what diversity and inclusion initiatives set out to do, which is equity.
In your role with the Diversity Council, you focus on one group of people. Who?
Culturally and racially marginalised women.
How did you come to that group? Why that group?
So I'm the senior project manager for a project called RISE, and RISE focuses on culturally and racially marginalised women in middle management who have been locked out of leadership roles in corporate Australia.
Some companies use quotas as a way of measuring the success of diversity initiatives. Is that something you're doing?
No, the quotas that or the KPIs that we're working towards are increasing the number of women in leadership roles, the number of women that are applying to leadership roles, increasing racial literacy and racial competency in organizations, helping organizations understand, identify, and address the barriers that they may not even know existed in their organization, and bridging the gap between what an organization thinks it's doing and actually how it's being felt by the people they're supposed to be supporting.
Corey, how do you feel about diversity initiatives?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with diversity, but it's the enforcement of the diversity that kind of creates the problems.
Andrew, are there any positives that can come from diversity targets?
The only positive I can think of is that diversity targets are self-destructive and will produce their own negation and will prove themselves to be utter failures in the end. If we continue down this route of continually prioritizing representation over and above meritocracy, then we end up in a situation where we will all fall and we will all suffer.
Why do you think so many workplaces then implement the policies?
On the one hand, there's a certain fear that if you don't implement these policies, then the woke mob will come for you. And believe me when I tell you that the woke mob can be vicious, right? And by the same token, there is a misconception around the idea that there is a copious amount of literature suggesting that there is a positive relationship between DEI initiatives and performance or productivity or profitability or whatever outcome you're looking at. That's simply false. The literature does not exist. Most of the literature that points to these causal relationships are in the gray literature. The reality of the fact is that it's the opposite. It is high-performing firms that have the money to implement those DEI policies. So you have the causality wrong. A correlation doesn't mean causation.
Corey, what effect is this having on the film and television industry?
You know, in funding bodies, I've seen policies where it's got to be at least 50% female, it's got to be 15% LGBT, it's got to be 10% deaf and disabled, it's got to be 5% Indigenous. The problem is we keep on adding more and more groups. I mean, the LGBT are constantly adding letters, they're adding numbers and exclamation marks. It'll be hieroglyphs next, it'll be peaches and eggplants. What do you got? What do you like? What's your preference? There are 650 ethnic groups on the planet. Are we going to include everyone? What are we trying to make here? Noah's Ark the sequel? I mean, it's and if you include everybody, in a 100-minute film, it's like 9 seconds of screen time each.
Sheetal, for situations like Corey's, is there a solution?
There is a solution. I think it really depends on the individual circumstances. Now, I can't speak to Corey's experience because there's only one facet of Corey that I can see by visibly viewing him, and I don't know his socioeconomic status and all the other different marginalities that he might experience. But for someone who's experienced a life of privilege, someone else's equity is always going to feel like oppression.
Jahin, you work in the education sector. You run workshops for young Aussie students. Your company employs 55 people. What does your workforce look like?
We've got about 25 staff members who are full-time and about 30 contracted program facilitators who deliver our programs across Australia. 80% of them weren't born in Australia. We've got a very diverse workforce and 75% is female or female identifying in our workforce. That allows us to do a lot of workshops, a lot of work with different demographics, especially a lot of marginalised communities.
So not a 50-50 split, you haven't been aiming for that?
No, actually we haven't, because the way we work in our industry, and it's a case-by-case different industries, we get contracted by the government, by different corporates, schools, universities, to deliver life skills programs specifically for different demographics. So for example, one day we could be working with First Nations youth, another day we could be working with children and young people with disability, another day we could be working with young females all around leadership and startups, for example. So we employ based on that work and depending on what the delivery is needed. And so lived experience and facilitating based on that lived experience is where we employ staff members.
Is it more important to meet client needs and sort of market demand, or is it more important to be diverse?
I would say you need a healthy balance between the both, because in terms of meeting market demands, a business is there to obviously solve a problem, but they also need to make money and revenue.
Verity, you work in HR in a male-dominated industry. How does your current employer approach hiring?
We approach it in a way trying to remove unconscious bias from any of the recruitment process. So things such as not having gendered language in advertisements and those kind of things. Being a male-dominated, like sort of STEM industry, you're talking a lot of like engineers and IT type areas which already are male-dominated, already in the universities are male-dominated as well. So trying to encourage females to come forward and actually put themselves forward for the role that we're trying to fill. But at the same time, we also are a business. We actually need to, be able to do the work. We need to be able to make money. We can't turn around and say, if we've got, 10 male applicants for a job, we can't turn around and say, well, we're not going to hire any of those male applicants because we haven't had a female application, because that person may not actually exist out there for us. So we need to balance our policies and our diversity along with actually delivering.
What policies does your company have?
So we've got a gender equity strategy. We've also got a DIAP strategy, so disability and inclusion action plan, so that I'm not using jargon, which is really quite common in HR. And we also have like a First Nations policy as well.
Why those groups?
We're a small industry and a small company, and they were the ones that are underrepresented within our workforce at this point in time.
Andrew, having worked in academia for more than 2 decades, would you describe it as diverse?
No. I would describe it as very diverse if you're talking about diversity in terms of skin color or ethnicity or gender identity. But in terms of viewpoint, it is extremely homogeneous. Universities are completely dominated by woke warriors who are trying to impose communism by stealth, and apparently they're being quite successful given the fact that these initiatives are so popular.
You no longer work in academia. Why is that?
That's a good question. I thought I had all this white male privilege, but it turns out I got sacked last year from RMIT University under circumstances that will be contested in the very near future in the court of law. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the specific details of why a professor on a permanent contract was sacked, but I will say that I stand out amongst my colleagues as someone who challenges the woke narrative and the woke orthodoxy.
Are there circumstances by which you'd believe you still have a job?
Well, certainly if I towed the woke narrative, I would certainly have a job. Maybe if I, identified as a woman with, a disability, who knows, maybe.
Abir, you're a journalist. How diverse is your industry?
I feel like we can collectively agree that it's not very diverse. I think especially in journalism, it's important to have a diversity of thought, not just in politics, socioeconomic status, race, gender. I think that's very important. So yes, I feel like there's work to be done.
Do you think policies, especially around diversity, are having a desired outcome?
I feel like when it's clumsily introduced just to appease a certain demographic or be good for optics, it looks bad and it has a bad outcome. I don't think it's catastrophic, especially when there's no examples to show that. But it's resulted in some negative experiences for myself where I've been put in uncomfortable situations where people attack me for benefiting from an opportunity. So I would say that that was horrible. I wouldn't say that that's catastrophic.
So the diversity is there, but maybe in your case that inclusion part of it wasn't?
I don't expect everyone that I talk to cater to every single need that I desire. That is very unrealistic and no one expects that. However, no one should go to work and hear racial slurs. No one should go to work and experience abuse. No one should go to work and experience tokenism. All these things shouldn't happen, but they do, and that's the reality of work sometimes, and that's the reality of HR initiatives sometimes.
So you have observed quite a bit of discrimination?
I would say so, and I would say it's a result of not enough diversity of thought.
Sheetal, is diversity alone enough?
Diversity alone isn't the answer because it's not a cocktail. You can't just add diversity and stir and seem to reap the benefits that ample research shows exists. You have to have the inclusion piece, and the inclusion is around people feeling respected, people feeling like they can contribute meaningfully, people feeling like they have a connection to the people that they're working with, and that there's an opportunity to progress.
Karen, does your current employer make you feel included?
Well, I'm a blind person that works for Guide Dogs Victoria, so 100%. And I have to tell you that never in my life have I worked for an organisation where I felt more celebrated. We all just work together so well.
Does that benefit the organisation?
I think inclusion benefits everyone. There's nothing to lose by including different types of people in the workspace.
Sheetal, does diversity within a business have financial benefits?
Yeah, research indicates that it does. I think 77% from a McKinsey research showed that millennials are more trusting of organizations that have diversity dimensions or some sort of diversity and inclusion policy.
Andrew, are there financial benefits?
The McKinsey report is the one that people refer to show that there's a positive relationship between DEI initiatives and various performance outcomes. But unfortunately, McKinsey is not a scientific organization. It is a consulting firm. And there are very real reasons for the fact that McKinsey found this relationship, because could you imagine the effect on McKinsey's business had they not found that relationship? So it's a perfect example, in my view as a scientist, of what we call confirmation bias. They're looking for this relationship to be true, and so they make it true in the research. There is very little evidence, empirical evidence, of a causal association between DEI initiatives and performance. In fact, it's the opposite.
Karan, are businesses genuinely trying to be inclusive, or is it more about virtue signalling and the bottom line?
There are companies that are doing that because they want to put on this facade that, look, we're this inclusive, amazing workspace, come work for us, we're so cool. There are workspaces that genuinely do it. And I'm going to give my workplace as an example, Guide Dogs Australia, hiring blind people, where I actually feel celebrated for my skill set, not just because I'm blind and have a cane. But then there are also companies that don't try. And it sort of makes you think, do you want to support a company that doesn't really believe it, but puts on this facade that they are diverse, or someone who doesn't even try?
Monique, you now run your own modelling agency. What kind of models do you manage?
4 types of models, so multicultural models, curve models, mature age models, and disability models. And I've deliberately picked these 4 pillars because these are 4 categories of, I guess, minority groups in the modelling environment that never had representation.
Are there any groups that you won't represent?
Intentionally, and no disrespect, but we don't really represent trans or gender fluids or that particular demographic, because that's not what our clients are looking for. They're looking for models that are traditionally male, traditionally female, but under the pillars of multicultural, curve, mature age and disabilities. And I do that specifically also because, one, I don't really understand that cohort. So I think it would be good if another agency started that focused on that particular, the LGBTIQA area, because they would understand how to manage those particular personalities and also the issues that come with that particular group. So for me, our modelling agency is very simple. We're not going to go for models that are excessively obese, because we want to encourage models that take care of themselves. But on the other side, we won't accept models that are anorexic or a size 4 to 6, because we want to represent people that eat well, they're healthy and happy with who they are. That shows in the camera and to our clients. And we sell happiness as a modelling agency.
Do you see that as a form of discrimination?
So I understand the difference between negative discrimination and positive discrimination. We exercise positive discrimination only because we choose to, I guess, celebrate those 4 pillars of multiculturalism, curve, mature age and disabilities, and male and female equally. And we do that positively because these are the 4 pillars that I think need representation and a voice, because I believe in, embrace diversity and inspire inclusion. And these are the 4 groups that I wish to elevate.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, what are your thoughts on positive discrimination?
as someone who was born in America, I would refer to that as affirmative action. It is a disservice to everyone involved, positive discrimination, in the sense that it creates a question mark over the heads of those who actually benefit from those types of initiatives, not only in terms of promoting mediocrity within organizations, but also creating a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in the minds of those who benefit from those programs, such that they feel like they benefited only by virtue of their skin color.
Corey, you wrote a script featuring characters of diverse cultural backgrounds. What feedback did you get when you pitched it?
The script that I wrote had a natural diversity in it. It wasn't, oh, we've got to have one of these and one of these. It just naturally happened with the research that I did. And there's one particular character that's based upon a guy I know who runs a Japanese restaurant, lovely guy called Eddie, but he's got this wonderful accent. And I incorporated this accent in some things that he said. And I was immediately attacked for this accent. Oh, that's a racist stereotype. We can't have that. You have to have him speak proper English with a proper English accent. So wait a sec. You want him to look Asian, but not have Asian culture. And I think that's where the sinister nature of what's behind this push is starting to come through. All well-intentioned at first, but you know, to say we want this guy who looks a different colour, but to sound exactly like me? I mean, isn't that just a bit racist?
Does the best person always get the job?
Does the best person always get the job? Gosh, I mean, you know, the film and television industry, that's not a new problem to the film and television industry. But I don't think the diversity and inclusion is helping that. I think it's making it worse.
Andrew, what's the fairest way to decide who gets the job?
There's only one way to decide who gets the job, and that's through meritocracy. That is through an assessment, a systematic evaluation of who possesses the right configuration of knowledge, skills, and abilities for a particular role.
Sheetal, what are your views on meritocracy?
Meritocracy is a fallacy. So you just mentioned that it's based on systems created by whom for the benefit of whom. So if we're looking at education, who has had access to that education to be able to be the most qualified person for that role? Definitely not my parents that were migrants. So when we're looking at meritocracy, and then we look even further back at how people are getting roles, it's shoulder taps. Father gives to son gives to next son. It's nepotism, it's not meritocracy. It has been around who you know, and you get a connection from who you know. So there's a discussion happening at the golf course on Sunday, and the next day the next person is hired because of the discussion they had. People like me aren't invited to places like that. I'm not gonna be part of that discussion. I'm not even on your radar, but I'll probably be one of the more meritorious people that you'd hire.
Can merit and diversity initiatives coexist?
Absolutely, I think it's such a disservice to put the two against each other. They're not mutually exclusive. People from diverse backgrounds don't lack merit. The measure of merit is what the issue is. How are we assessing merit? Against whose standard? Against the dominant group? Against what? That's a system and the structure that needs to be assessed.
Abir, you got your start in journalism as an intern through a diversity placement. Was that the case for other interns?
When I started, interns were selected based on who you knew. And this is not an assumption that I made. I found this out because every time someone met me and they found out that I was there for 6 weeks, just like everyone else, they asked me who I knew to get in. I would say I was asked 25 times. Every single person I met asked me that same question, which informed me that there was a long past, especially in journalism, of dad taps son's shoulder, which I have no problem against, because you grow up, you learn that your dad is a camera operator, you can see yourself doing that, and therefore you enter the industry. I grew up, my parents had a restaurant. They came from a different country. I didn't see a path to becoming a journalist that didn't involve knowing someone.
How did being on a placement affect the way you approached your work?
I feel like journalism is a trade. I feel like you need to be in there for weeks on end. You need people to kind of yell at you. You need to just get in the mud. You need to sit at a crime scene on a gutter eating a sandwich and asking people questions. So being on placement put me in that opportunity to show everyone that I was more than capable of doing it.
Karen, have you ever benefited from a diversity policy?
That's a hard one. The way I look at it, if I've got a certain job, it's because of who I am. If I'm a disability ambassador for a certain event, it's because I do have a disability. So I'm there to talk about my lived experience to encourage other people with disabilities to come on board. So I think it depends on the job. I don't think I've ever got a job just because he's the disabled guy. I've got a job because I'm qualified, I have a degree, I've got the experience, or he happens to be blind.
My name is Maggie Zhao. I was born and bred in Melbourne. Growing up, I was usually the only Asian person in my group, so I proudly wore the badge of being the token Chinese girl. I don't like it. I feel like there's an element of embarrassment as well as empathy for my former self. I thought it was cool that my friends were friends with me despite the fact that I was Chinese. When I look back, I think I was definitely projecting a lot of those feelings too. Hey guys! Hello! So good to see you! Hello, hello! Something that I really value in my life today is having friendships from diverse backgrounds. For sure, I have a lot of close white friends who are some of my nearest and dearest. We have so many of the same hobbies and interests, and we see the world in similar ways. But a lot of my friendships with women of colour, a lot of the time, we're super different people. And we have very different backgrounds and careers, but there is just this understanding that you kind of both share. And sometimes comments will be made, right, that kind of feel uncomfortable to you. You can kind of give each other the side eye. I'll be like, hey, was there something uncomfortable before? And kind of just have that validation. I also think it just adds so much to a friendship group when you do have people from diverse perspectives, because otherwise, you're kind of just seeing things through one lens. I think it's important to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, that you won't always do the right thing, say the right thing, but I think it's this willingness to learn that I do think it's worth it.
Maggie, this year you made a New Year's resolution. What was it?
My New Year's resolution was actually to make more male friends, because I did a stock take of my friendship group and realised I was actually lacking.
Why did you sort of want those male friends?
Diversity is something that's so important to me, and I sometimes think we do stop the conversation at racial diversity. But for me, I know it can be so beneficial to have people around you that come from different lived experiences, who have different school of thoughts to you. And I think with friendships, they're a place for rest and relaxation. So naturally, I found myself gravitating to people who had similar interests, and a lot of the time those people weren't men. But I wanted to take a conscious effort and kind of fix my biases and to step into the unknown.
How far did you go to achieve that?
I posted a TikTok. It's had over 1 million views, and it's also had a lot of comments with people saying that they related, or also people warning me against it.
Let's have a look at that.
Is it embarrassing to admit that one of my goals for this year is to make a male friend? I just want a friend that's a man, that is not just a partner of one of my friends, Friendship is something I'm most grateful for in my life, but how come I have 0 guy friends? Taking advice and applications in the comments.
What kind of responses did you get, Maggie?
Most people were supportive, and it was a really nice space because I think there was a shared vulnerability from other people who admitted that they had a deficit in their friendship group, whether that be based on gender or otherwise. Of course, I did have some people who shared their own experiences trying to gain new diverse friends from whatever category. So it was a mixed bag.
Has it led to more male friendships?
Slowly but surely, I am building on the male connections in my life and really making a conscious effort in that realm. So by the end of the year, I think I'll have a few men to add to my friendship repertoire.
Andrew, you have a PhD in economic sociology. Do most of us have diverse friendship and social groups?
No, we don't. We tend to associate with people who share our values, and this is to everyone's detriment. I would say that there is a huge benefit to having multiple viewpoints and multiple personalities surrounding you, because it gives you a sense of perspective in the world. Otherwise, you end up like Xi Jinping in China that has a bunch of yes men surrounding him. Should I do this? Yeah, of course you should. That's a great idea. You really need to have people challenge you and push your values in order for you to grow as an individual.
Maggie, you're in your 20s. How do you think young Aussies feel about DEI policies?
I think DEI policies are a necessary evil or potentially necessary training wheels in the path for equity. Meritocracy, in my eyes, is a myth. Hard work does not exist in a bubble. In a perfect world, I wouldn't want these policies around. But the reality is we have many groups of people in our society who have been held back for various reasons. And we have these policies to even the playing field. We say that Australians love giving people a fair go. Well, this is that.
Verity, in your previous job, you went through a slightly unusual recruitment process. What was that?
So it was what was called a blind recruitment process. What they do is they redact any socio-economic identifiers from your application, your name, age, gender, where you went to university, or if you have been to university, any education, all that sort of stuff. And it focuses just on what your lived experience has been in the workplace.
Were you conscious that that's what they were doing?
Not at the time when I applied.
How did the hiring process go?
So the hiring process was the same as any other hiring process that I had ever been through. So I had no idea that they had done any of this to my resume.
Did you get the job?
I did. I did get the job. And it was a job that I didn't actually think that I could do. So I had my own bias, I suppose, towards myself and was holding myself back from it. So it actually gave me a lot of confidence to know that there was a group of people that actually had a look at it and went, yep, you can actually do that. I've always worked in a male-dominated industry, but I've had a lot of experiences where people have sort of said to me that, well, you're just the admin, sort of assistant, or you should be at home in the kitchen, or, those sort of things, or talked over me during meetings and those kind of things and not actually valued what I had to say. So the fact that I, A, had applied for a job that I wasn't confident that I was going to be able to do, and B, get it, was, amazing.
Once you began that role, did you feel that the hiring process matched the ethos of the company?
Yes, because at the time it was a major recruitment process that the company had gone through, which increased their senior leadership representation of women significantly, which after 2 years of being there, the whole entire culture of the organisation had completely changed to being a much happier place to be. So employee wellbeing was, up, which also bleeds into productivity and other, more inclusive practices as well.
Fahim, you changed your name before you started getting job callbacks. Do you think you could have benefited from a hiring process like Verity's, where all your name and gender and everything were kept off the application?
I think yes, because the industry I worked was a technical. If they purely, judge you based on what is a requirement and then test you against that, I think I would have been benefited.
Sheetal, what do you believe is the end goal of these policies?
Equity. Equity for people from diverse backgrounds, creating a level playing field that redresses the social and historical inequities that have held back people through no fault of their own, through circumstances completely outside of their control. We don't choose the color of our skin. We don't choose where we're born. We don't choose a lot of the factors that become marginalized by society.
Andrew, I think it's safe to say that you're not a big fan of diversity policies, but how do you feel about this sort of end goal of fairness and equity? Is that worth pursuing?
It is an illusion. and I've already shown that it's an illusion, on the basis of the fact that we cannot understand the depths to which an individual suffers from disadvantage or benefits from privilege. On the basis of that fact, which is indisputable, you can aim all you want for equity, but you will never achieve it. From my perspective, this is just a way of introducing Marxist policies into capitalist societies by stealth.
Sheetal, do you think that's what you're working towards, an illusion?
No, I would hope not. I think we're working very hard to redress things that, through no fault of anyone, have come to be. These are systems and structures. It's not an individual thing, but we do need to look at it through an intersectional lens and on an individual basis.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to you all for being here. That's all we have time for. You can catch up on this episode or any others on SBS On Demand, and I'll see you next time.